We have here a basic disease spread model. We can set some very basic parameters like the height and width of the infection grid and the infectious period. If we look at the grid in the first place, we get the 20 by 20 grid which we specified, and we have a 10-day infectious period. That means when we click on a square to infect it, for 10 days, any of the adjacent squares has a probability of becoming infected. After being infected for 10 days, the square then becomes immune and is no longer able to infect any of the squares nearby. If I just run it once, you'll see an example. We start off by infecting this square in the corner. It goes red, as do some squares around it, and subsequently they become immune. If we lower the infectious period to 5 days, we'll see that the disease spread behaves quite differently. We're going to start again in the corner. And this time we see that a few squares remain uninfected. If I start in the middle of the grid, again we see a different behavior. And even if I started in the same place each time, there are squares which remain uninfected, but which ones they are unpredictable. Each time we run this disease spread model, we get a different outcome. If we move to a slightly more complex version, we see with this one, as before, we can set the height and the width of the grid and the infectious period. I'll put this down to 5 as before. However, this time we're able to click on a square to protect it, therefore making it uninfectable. And this way we can simulate natural disease barriers such as lakes or mountains, and we can also see how the disease spreads under these circumstances. We'll see sometimes that the barrier has little effect on the overall spread. And sometimes it stops the disease from crossing over. In any case, each time we run it, the way the disease spreads and those squares which remain uninfected varies. And we'll run it one more time just to see. This time the disease has crossed over the barrier, but still some squares on each side remain uninfected. We have a level of extra complexity here. In the previous models, the susceptibility, that's the likelihood of the disease spreading to an adjacent square, has always been 0.125. And decrease the infectious period and decrease the susceptibility. And we'll put the barrier back in. And then start the infection again. We see in this case it stopped almost immediately. None of the adjacent squares became infected, and that solitary square became immune. We see that period took only 6 days. If we run it again and start in exactly the same position again, a very different behavior here, And this time the disease ran its course within 42 days, but infected a much larger area. And if we do exactly the same again, this time the disease has run its course in 15 days. What we find with this model is that we can start to play with a few more parameters. We can make the infection area smaller. We can change the infectious period. Let's leave it at 10. We can decrease the susceptibility. Let's put it down to 0.1. And this time let's try it without any barriers. It took 58 days to run the course. If we run again, very much the same level of infection, but this time 63 days. And one more time. And this time the disease has run its course in 62 days. This is a fairly static model. It doesn't allow for any of these squares to move or to infect anything other than the adjacent squares. This time we created a dynamic model where infected cells are distributed within an area and are able to move a little bit. If an infected cell comes within close proximity of another one, there's a likelihood that the other one will become infected too. We can set the number of people in the population, how near they need to get to each other, the size of the area which is populated, the infectious period, and this time someone infected will die within 15 days, or they will become immune if they survive. We can preset a number of population who are already immune. In this case we've made it 10. If we populate this, we can then choose any of these circles to infect it and start the simulation. And here we see the disease spreading and people who've been infected either becoming immune or dying. And we see at the end that we've got a number of deaths and the rest of the people have become immune, and a large number weren't at all infected. That took 75 days, 42 were immune, 17 dead. Let's run it exactly the same again. And populate it. Let's choose another individual to infect. And let's start it. And this time we see a much shorter period. We can increase the proximity for infection to 30. Increase the infectious period to 15 days. And let's start again. We can do exactly the same. And this time we can start by infecting more than one person at a time. And watch. This disease simulation is in very different ways to the other one. In the first place, it's a dynamic model which allows the infected populations to move. And secondly, in this case, those who've become infected can either die or become immune. It gives us a number more parameters for people to play with to see the variation in the way which diseases spread or die out. One last time. Let's start in the middle and infect a couple of people, and off we go. And there we see the disease took 37 days. No one is infected anymore. 44 are immune and 16 died.